good evening, everyone. And here we are for our third live, not our third broadcast, but our third live of ART360 Edition 3. And I'm joined by Imelda Lo from Toronto. So exciting. Welcome, Imelda. We're really delighted to have you. We did in Edition 2, we had someone from Canada as well. We love interviewing people from all over the world because it's great to get a different perspective on the art world and how things are operating around the world. We're all kind of joined in that shared collective of artists, aren't we? But we all have our own like individual lived experience. So welcome, Imelda. It's really lovely to have you here tonight on Friday Night Live, as they say. What I'm going to do first for everyone is I'm just going to share your page in the ART360 magazine so everyone knows where they can find you and how they can get in contact with you, because I'm sure they are going to be fascinated after this evening and want to find out more. So here's the magazine. I'm sure it's becoming very, very familiar to everyone now. And Imelda is on page 46. So if you go through to the index here, the contents index, and actually you just need to press on page 46, and there we go. We go straight through to Imelda's page, which gives us a little bit of insight immediately into what we're going to be talking about tonight, because Imelda is a real multi-disciplinary artist. So she's a writer, an artist, a podcaster. She develops games. This is going to be a fascinating interview. So I know you're all going to be fascinated. So when you want to get in contact with Imelda afterwards, you've got her email, you've got her website, which I'm going to show you as well in a minute. You've got Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. So that's all on page 46 of the Pure ART360 Edition 3 Autumn 2021 magazine. So that's the first place you need to go if you want to find out how to get in contact with Imelda. The next thing I'm going to quickly do is also share with you Imelda's website. So when you land on that later, you will know that you're in the right place. So here we go. This is Imelda's website. It's called Fortuna's Games. And we're going to be talking about Sam in New York a bit this evening as well. So you'll hear all about Sam in New York. But you'll know that you're in the right place when you arrive on that website. So there you go. That's how you contact Imelda. So I'm going to now hand this, as I normally do, focus the screen on Imelda, because you don't want to look at me and hear about me. You want to hear about everything that Imelda has to say. So Imelda, tell us, give us a bit about your background, how you ended up doing what you're doing, you know, your life experience. Give us some context.
Right. So thank you so much for introducing me and, you know, showing the magazine and also showing the website. To begin, I started doing art from a very young age, but unfortunately, I didn't really know what I was doing. I was mostly attending hobby classes, and basically the teachers there mostly had me copy, you know, for example, these really famous art pieces using different media, such as colored pencils, a pencil, and other things like that. And, you know, I never really developed a sense of style at that age, you know, from ages, I would say 5 all the way to 15 or so. It was just mostly me copying and emulating the masters and learning basic techniques such as sketching, how to do proportions, perspectives, and such. So I had a good foundation of how to do art and what art was all about, but I didn't really have any original ideas of my own or a direction to take my art in. So it wasn't really until later in high school I started going online more. So this was around maybe 10 years ago or 12 years ago when I was 16 or 17. So during this time, I started looking more into online communities such as DeviantArt, which some of you may remember from the early 2010s and the late 2000s. It was a very big thing back then. A lot of people there were posting a lot of fan art, you know, for famous series like, you know, the Marvel series and anime stuff, manga, a lot of stuff like that. And it was very interactive. People in real life, a lot of them were also into art as well, but it was kind of like the art I was into. We were mostly just going to art hobby classes and copying stuff or making crafts for, high school or middle school. So I never really had this idea of creating my own story and creating my own narratives through art until I joined DeviantArt, which was where I started reading a lot of original fiction as well as fan fiction. So I would say DeviantArt was where I started to think more about what I could do with art rather than just, use art as a way to complete a certain assignment for high school, for instance.
So
Sorry.
DeviantArt, because I'm not aware of this DeviantArt. Is it a platform or is it a style and a genre? Because I know you were born in Hong Kong, but you grew up really essentially in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
Is this something that's quite particular to Canada, or did you see this globally?
DeviantArt is a platform, so it's a little bit like, for example, artstation.com. So the URL for DeviantArt is deviantart.com, and it is a global platform. The founders, I believe, are American, but there were all kinds of people from all over the globe on DA, which is the short form of DeviantArt. And one of my friends who is currently watching this, who is one of my major inspirations for my series, R.N. Rovale, she herself was on DeviantArt, and this is how we met, actually. It wasn't until a lot later, like when I was first on DeviantArt in the early 2010s, I didn't know her yet, and I don't think she was active on DA until later, but this was the platform where I met some of the people who would inspire me, yes.
So DeviantArt was not just a platform for showing art, but there was also a facility within it to collaborate and chat to other people and share your ideas.
Yes, exactly. So it kind of looks like an old-fashioned forum, but with art. So it's not exactly the most cutting-edge platform these days when you look back at it. But back then, it was a good way to talk to the artists, comment on their art, and ask them questions about whatever they were drawing. So this was how I discovered a lot of artists who were creating their own stories back in 2010. And, this kind of inspired me to think about what I could do with my art skills and think about if there were any stories I wanted to tell.
So were you still at school at this point?
Yes, I was.
Yeah. And what were you studying? What subjects were you studying at school at that point in your career?
I was in secondary school, so I was pretty much studying everything. And at that point in my life, I didn't really know what I really wanted to do in university. So I was still, contemplating what I could do. And one of the things I started really getting into in late high school, pre-university, was history. Because this was also kind of related to my previous interest in politics, because many of my classmates were also very much into debate and, all these political ideas that were, kind of popular at that time. So that was how I branched off into history, because I use history as a way to look into how certain political ideologies and beliefs became popular.
So that's interesting, isn't it? Because the journey is the most. How do we end up in the navigation of the context? How do we end up where we do? You're saying that this DeviantArt platform gave you an in to the art life, but also the conversations at high school around politics and history are something that also inspired you and gave you direction at that point in your life. And how old were you around this time, do you think?
16 or 17.
16 or 17, yeah. So you're interested in history, you're having a chat on this chat forum kind of marketplace. How did it go? Where did it go from there?
From there, I was thinking about so should I answer a question that I
you can ask that. So Sandra's just asked us, history from which country in particular, please, were you interested in? So you're in Canada, but your heritage is from Hong Kong. What kind of history were you interested in?
I was interested in histories from all over the world. In particular, I think what really attracted me to American politics was that it was always mentioned on the news, and it was very polarizing. I always kind of wanted to know why there were always so many polarizing views. And I think another thing that also attracted my attention back then was, the history of communism, because, this was also something that was often discussed in American politics. You would see, a lot of people on the Republican side of the game, for example, they would be saying that, oh, so and so is a Marxist. So I wanted to investigate what they meant by that, and what do they generally mean by Marxist and communism. So I looked into that, and that was how I also got into Russian politics and Russian history, which is a good lead-in to how I eventually became friends with one of my best friends currently, Tete de Punk.
Okay, so you've met the lady R.N. Dorovlo, who everyone can click on the link at the bottom of the chat here and see the link there. That will take you through. So you met her on DeviantArt, but then you also, as a result of this political conversation, you made friends with the lady Tete de Punk. So I will in a minute put her link at the bottom as well. So if people are interested, they can go through to that. Just before we let you carry on, if anyone's got any questions, can you put them in the ask a question box, which is also at the bottom here, because otherwise it's quite distracting for myself and Imelda if the questions pop up at the side. So if you can pop them in the ask a question area at the bottom, we will then see the orange light come up and we'll know that there's a question in there. Thank you. So Tete de Punk, getting into the history and the political history and Russian political history, you got to know Tete. How did you get to know her? It is a her, is it?
DeviantArt.
Through DeviantArt. DeviantArt is this sounds to be like quite a pivotal thing in your life.
Not anymore.
Not anymore.
DeviantArt has changed for the worse since 2018, I believe. So I have not gone there for a few years, but yes, as a young teenager and in my early 20s, DeviantArt played a large role in these kind of things.
Yeah, it was a big inspiration in your life at that time. Everything changes, and also our perspective of things change. So for other people, it might be a great platform right now. But for you, yeah, you've grown up and moved on. So yeah, tell us about this relationship and how this has inspired and influenced you.
Yes. So yes, back in 2015, so Tete de Punk, I think she followed me because I drew a poster of one of my characters dressed as a Cossack. And one of her current novel projects, 70 Fierce Years, is about a man, Andre, going through various changes in the 20th century. He was born a Cossack, but then he went through World War I and then the Russian Revolution, which changed the fabric of his society. And, that really made him have to change a lot of things in his own life, especially since he grew up as a Cossack. And in the new order, in the Soviet regime, there was no room for Cossacks anymore. So he has to change and adapt to a new lifestyle.
So this is a fictional character?
Yes.
So she invented this character. This is a character that she invented.
Yes.
Yeah. And so you were really inspired by that. So you got through the Deviant platform, you went and started to follow her and she followed you back. How did that proceed from there?
It's actually a bit more complex. So when I first met her, he did have a character called Andre, but he was not in the 20th century. He was actually kind of like a War and Peace character from the 19th century because, she's always been a big Regency and 19th century fan. So he was more of kind of like a Pride and Prejudice like character, and so it was in a different time period and the focus was kind of different. It was not really on a man adapting to modernity and psychological changes. It was more about, just war and how that affects him. And at that time of my life, I was also writing about war and politics too, but in a different cultural context and also a different time period. I was writing about the Russian Civil War in Central Asia, which is a topic that not many people, including myself, knew about until I read about it on Wikipedia. And I decided to write a story about it in 2015.
Right. So you're right. You start writing. So this is the start of your kind of movement into the art world through writing. Are you still at school at this point, or have you moved on to university?
I was in university. Actually, okay. I was in university, but I had already finished undergrad. So for
Okay.
undergrad, I already started writing a little bit into my story, which was called Basmachi, after the rebels who were fighting the communists in Central Asia. And yeah, so I did write a little bit during my undergrad years, but I was mostly focusing on my studies because I wanted to go to law school. And so when I finally met Tete de Punk in 2015, and when I was finally starting to write Basmachi and to finish it in 2015, I was in law school.
Ah, so you were in law school by this point, and your intention was to become a lawyer.
Actually, my intention was uncertain. One of the reasons I actually talk about this in Salmon, New York too, I struggled with really thinking about why I wanted to be in law school. And one of the reasons I threw myself into writing and creativity and art, as well as talking to people online, was because I couldn't derive a lot of satisfaction, in law school. I was, truth be told, I was sort of depressed.
So you were finding your solace within the artistic community.
Yes, because I didn't really find a lot of direction in my life during that time. It felt very alienating to go to a university where I was studying a subject I didn't really like.
So you thought you were going to like it, but as it transpired, this is not something that you found motivating or fulfilling once you got there. I think that's a story that a lot of us will empathize with, that we set our course in a direction, and we have to be flexible and adaptable, don't we? Because sometimes we find that it's not actually what we expected it to be.
Absolutely, because I thought law school was going to be a continuation of my history and political science undergraduate studies. But it turned out that it was very cliquish. People were really hard to talk to. And that kind of made me insecure about my own social skills, which, as I explored my own stories, about Sam and Joel, I kind of developed over a very long period of time. I used to be a very shy person who had a lot of difficulty making friends as a kid. But then I really pushed myself to be more outgoing and even a little bit eccentric in high school, because I wanted to prove to myself that I could change myself in the way that I wanted to be. Like, I always wanted to have a lot of friends, and I was kind of frustrated at myself at being unable to do so. And so for around 10 years, not 10 years, when I'm age 14 to 21, I was pretty good at socializing. But then going to law school, it made me think that I wasn't good at socializing again, because everyone was in these tight cliques where I couldn't go in.
So you've got the skills to be able to adapt yourself into a situation, because you've shown that you've been able to make yourself sociable and make friends because you set your focus on it and you were determined. But now you find yourself in a position where that's not working. What do you do?
I guess what I did do, because I wasn't really accustomed to doing this kind of thing, I just kind of threw myself into my work, my creative work. I was finding fulfillment in it like I had never before, because before I just drew pictures because they were pretty or because I liked the historical costumes, which I was doing for my first series on DeviantArt, Basmachi. I was just drawing beautiful folk costumes that I found on Wiki Commons and just, putting a lot of detail into them. But there was no soul to the characters, I felt. I didn't really feel like I could connect with them. I wasn't really exploring things that I felt needed to be explored. It was more of a visual feast, kind of like a museum piece. Beautiful, but unrelatable.
Yeah, shallow. Yeah. So now you're finding yourself in a position where you're emotionally and mentally fairly vulnerable, and you dig deep inside of yourself, and what comes out at that point?
I think about finishing law school and then what else I can do after that. And, the more I looked into it, the more I realized I didn't want to be a lawyer. Unfortunately, a lot of people around me, including family, were pressuring me down this path. But then as I realized by talking to other people in this path, it's not as easy to become a lawyer as you think it is. Even if you have the degree and you have great marks, which I admittedly did not have, because for the first time in my life, I was getting pretty bad marks in law school. But even if I did get good marks, there would be no guarantee that I could get a clerkship or, a training position that would lead to a good law job. Because here in Ontario, you need to have this kind of articling/clerkship position. And after that, you will get hired by them usually. Or else you have to find someone to, take them under your wing, take you under their wing and train you how to file stuff and, go to court and stuff, which is difficult if you don't know anyone in the field. And, if you don't have any connections, how can you do that?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that story rings true for most professions if in that ilk. And there is it, you get the degree and you get the masters and you get all the education that you need, but actually then there's a much bigger process that you have to, doctor, for instance, there's an architect, there's a much longer process that no one really talks about until you get there. So so you found yourself in this with family pressures not really supporting you in your decision that you might not want to proceed. How did you navigate that part?
It was difficult, to be honest, I was counting this down with a friend of mine. 2017 was when I graduated. And, it was kind of anticlimactic, my parents were very excited about the graduation, but I was not. No one really was, except for the people who really secured stable jobs or a clerkship. But everyone else was just there. And we kind of realized that it was mostly just for our parents. They didn't know the reality of the situation. Like, they just thought it was something that's going to lead to something great. But, there's so many factors involved, and so many of them are out of your control, especially if you don't know anyone in the field who's willing to take you under their wing.
So what did you do next? What was your next steps?
My next step was to start looking for a job in any field. And, I was open to anything. And unfortunately, I couldn't really find anything full-time. And during these few years, from 2017 to 2019, I took on a couple of freelance jobs, as well as, at the beginning, some academic jobs where I helped a couple of professors mark exams and stuff. And I mean, during this period, I had a lot of free time, but unfortunately, I didn't really use that time to my advantage creatively, because I was so bogged down by what my parents were saying, what society was saying, what people were expecting from me, that I felt guilty for not constantly looking for a job because I didn't have one. Like, I didn't have a, full-time job that people considered, a typical career path job.
And so you have got a job now and you have turned that around. Was there a moment or a person that you can remember that really switched it for you?
I think it wasn't a person or a moment per se, but rather the pandemic, ironically.
Right.
Yes. So in 2020, when the pandemic started, I was still, kind of just not really doing anything. I was just doing some freelance jobs that didn't pay that much, and just document review, which is this very tedious process of going through thousands, if not, maybe even tens of thousands of documents and reviewing them for relevance. And that's what some lawyers do, or people who have law degrees do, if they can't find a job as a lawyer. So I was surviving off document review and, just some random, university stuff, as well as some editing jobs. And in 2020, what really changed was the pandemic. So now everything's under lockdown and I can't go outside. And I had even more free time for myself and to think about what I really wanted, what I wanted to achieve, and what really brought me joy. Because I realized that, just trying to look for a job so desperately, and even if I did find a job, a full-time job, will I really be happy? Is that the meaning of life? Just to find a full-time job and say to people, yeah, I have a career now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So what did you do? So you're at the beginning of the pandemic. What action did you take?
So at the beginning of the pandemic, I started to think more about my personal projects. And at that point, I was pretty good friends with R.N. Ravelet and Tete de Punk, but we were not yet talking on a daily basis. So we were just talking maybe once a month or a couple of times per month, mostly through text at this time, even though we had talked in person before. I had met R.N. Ravelet in person before the pandemic, actually. It was in Barcelona in 2017. And, we actually went to a few museums and talked about her book. And, we shared tips about how to be inspired and stuff. So at this point, I wasn't really actively thinking about my friendships. I was mostly thinking about myself. And I was just looking online and I saw that, there was the Webtoon short story contest of 2020. And that piqued my interest. I'm not sure why, because in the past, I would have never considered joining such a contest because I never thought I had it in myself to create a comic that was more than 2 pages.
Yeah. So you mentioned R.M. Ravelet's book. Have you got a copy of the book with you?
Yes, I have. It's right here.
Let's have a look at her book. So this is her book, and this is the book that has been underpinning some of your inspiration, really.
Yes, exactly. And it's called Lucky Wolf. I know it's mirrored, so it's harder to read. And here's
no, it's okay. We can read it properly.
Okay. So R.N. Ravelet. And basically, it's a historical novel about the Viking Age, actually. But as R.N. Ravelet has stated on my podcast, it is different from a lot of historical novels in that it is a psychological study. So kind of like my works, it investigates why people say the things they do and why they make certain choices and how that influences a lot of events. So
that's quite interesting, isn't it? Because that is exactly the position you're in now. What influences your choices? So you met her, but now you've started talking to her at the beginning of the pandemic. How did that influence your decisions, do you think? That relationship with her and her writing as well?
Right. So basically, I started thinking more about what I could do because I see so many people online, posting stuff. And she was also posting the digital copy of Lucky Wolf onto a website called Tapas, which I was also now a part of, kind of like considering it a second version of DeviantArt.
It's so interesting, these platforms, because they're not platforms that I am aware of at all. And I'd be really fascinated to know whether any people who are watching had any awareness of DeviantArt and Tapas, like as in tapas, I'm presuming, TAPAS.
Yes, tapas.io.
Yeah, so like and tapas that you eat. It just shows that someone, people use the term digital native for people of your age group, and we're not. I'm older than you, so I'm not a digital native. There was no digital when I was growing up. And it shows that, the influence this has on you. It's been absolutely fundamental, hasn't it? You've turned to digital each time there's been a disruption in your life, you've turned to digital. So this time you turned to tapas.
Right, exactly. And Tapas was where R.N. Ravelet was posting her novel, Lucky Wolf, before it got published as a hardcover novel. It was in digital format, and she was posting, I think, 1 chapter every 2 weeks. So I was really inspired by this because I had a bunch of story ideas in my head, but I never put them into fruition. All I did back then was draw a random picture, for example, of Sam doing something crazy or goofy. And then I had like a subtitle underneath it on Instagram. That was the extent of my creative process. I never created any stories that were longer than 1 chapter, unfortunately. And, I think R.N. Ravelet and other people too, their creative output really, really influenced me to think more about what I could do for my own stories and, kind of do my characters justice. Because as Tete de Punk always says, sometimes characters are kind of like people of their own. They're not just these tools that people use to express certain ideas. Sometimes they can be seen as individuals that are really drawn from aspects of ourselves.
So you have 2 characters, Sam of New York and Joel, don't you? And so you mentioned the competition. Did you actually pursue the competition?
Yes, I did. And the result of that competition is my first finished graphic novel where Sam makes his first appearance in anything that's actually finished, which is Finding Sam. And Finding Sam is actually really based on a lot of the events I just told you guys about, which was, law school and the struggle to define yourself, especially when everyone around you is telling you you should pursue a specific path. Sam, like myself, also has parents who wanted him to go to law school, but he also struggles with not really wanting to be there and also wanting to be creative. But unlike me, instead of wanting to be a writer and artist, he wants to be an actor and filmmaker.
So how did it feel producing that first book?
I was ecstatic. I was just amazed by how I actually could put myself out there and actually finish something for once. I did have some difficulties at first because it took me a long time to finish some of the panels at first. But once I got the hang of it, it just got easier and easier for me to start doing more and more. And, I was able to finish, how many pages is this? I think over 200,
Wow.
244 pages within 2 months, which was very shocking to me because before like I told you guys, I did not even finish a single story before.
So in the book, flip us some pages. Is it all writing or is it illustrated? What does it look like inside? So it's illustrated. Wow.
It's
so you've created the visuals and the story right through that book.
Yes, exactly. So I kind of see it as like sort of almost cinematic because I always had this interest in creating something that's like a movie, but then, with words and pictures, because I think that also is more immersive than pure words. And to be honest, I'm not as much of a creative writer as R.N. Raveley and Tete DePunk. It takes me a lot longer to write so much compared to them. So I just decided to go with being a graphic novelist because that fit me better. And also it could put my art skills to some use.
Yeah. So how did you create those images? Did you create them digitally? Did you draw them and scan them? How did you create the images in the book?
All of my images are drawn digitally using a stylus on my phone. In the past, I used to use a graphics tablet, like back on DeviantArt when I was in 2010 or something, or even while creating Bismachi, my historical series in 2014. But it broke in 2016. It broke, and I didn't buy a new one. And by the time the pandemic hit, I just decided to just go ahead and draw on my phone because a little earlier, like back in 2019, before the pandemic started, I had started drawing a little bit more as I was commuting to this part-time job. I was just drawing on my phone as I was, on the train waiting to go to work. So that was where I started to think about drawing on the phone more. And, that also kind of tied into the idea of productivity because before I wasn't very productive. I only drew whenever I felt like it. But starting then, I started to realize I could spend some of the time I usually use doing nothing to actually draw. So instead of listening to music or just staring out the window, I was like, why not draw something?
Yeah. And so did you set yourself a goal of like, I need to draw so many images for this book per week or so you set yourself a target?
Yes, exactly. And that really helped me. I realized, the importance of discipline because before, I was never very disciplined when it came to quote unquote hobbies, which was all what I viewed art as. I never really viewed art or creativity in the same vein as something, connected to work. And maybe that was one of the reasons why I never became that productive when it came to art. The minute I started viewing it as something that could be, kind of like work, something that I have to have a goal for, something that I could build towards, I realized that I could do more with it.
So it was a mindset. Once your mindset switched from the preconditioning that a lot of us suffer from, which is, art's lovely, but what's your actual job going to be? Or, you could be an artist, but what's your plan B to actually make some money? Actually, you can be a full-time artist, and I encompass all artists in this: writer, actor, musician, etc., a painter, sculptor. You can do that and make a very good living for yourself. But as you have just correctly identified, you have to have the mindset and the attitude to be disciplined. It's the things we do, the small things we do every day, that change our lives, not the massive things that we do. So you've suddenly come upon that through your chats with other artists, and you've absorbed that piece of inspiration somehow in this journey, that actually you need to be disciplined, you need to set yourself goals, set yourself targets, and you created that first book. What happened next? You've got Sam of New York. How is that? Where did that book come from? Where did that fall into the process?
Right. So before I answer that, this will actually tie into it. R.N. Rothwell has asked a question. It is, how are your new books, Sam in New York and the Book of Joel, different from your old historical pieces like Bismachi?
Yeah.
So, okay, to answer this, I think that it's very different because Bismachi, like I said, was kind of like a museum piece. It was mostly a way for me to explore these massive ideas, this idea of revolution, death, what does it mean to be, rebelling against a society idea, or, just kind of like this idea of surviving war and famine, which are more like macro ideas, kind of like, something that most of us are not really familiar with. So it was more like a theoretical kind of thing based on the historical and sociological and political readings I was having at that time during university. But for my new works, I think they are drawn from something more intimate, something that's based on my own personal experiences, as well as the experiences of friends who have told me about their personal struggles. So I think my new works are more relatable. I think the characters are more human, and I think more memorable because they're not just based on aesthetics or, something grand or dramatic or operatic.
I think that's a really interesting point you make, because actually what people connect with is the intimate story, the thing that's unique about you. And that's the thing that draws them into you. If we're talking about the bigger perspective, as you say, the wider world, the wider context, it's very generic. And once you actually go in and you go deep and you start giving something that is intimate and is really specific to you and your emotions and your feelings, then people can connect with it. They can recognize bits of themselves, they can recognize aspects that they relate to, and then you draw them into your story. Absolutely. So Sam of New York, talk to us about Sam of New York.
Right. So basically Sam of New York is basically an extension, or you can say an alternative retelling of Finding Sam. In Finding Sam, just like myself, because Sam and Joel are kind of like author avatars, like they're both basically both two aspects of myself, but split into two people. So in Finding Sam, Sam was not very happy. So this is not the way he usually presents himself, because Sam is usually a goofy kind of, eccentric guy who likes to make jokes, and he really likes to stand out from the crowd and be the center of attention. But in Finding Sam, we see a different side to him. He's kind of withdrawn, kind of depressed, and he's just not really sure what to do with his life, especially since his father is having some health issues. So this is a different kind of Sam from what we usually see in Sam in New York, which is currently still being serialized in Tapas. So yeah, every Sunday a new chapter of Sam in New York comes out, and basically it's a retelling of Sam's life from the very beginning. So we see him as a little boy growing up on the Lower East Side of New York, and he grows up, has a bunch of friends, and he tries to mold himself into what he wants to be, which is this amazing movie star / filmmaker.
And you can see how that's reflecting your story, because you've just told us about your story about wanting to reinvent yourself, basically. So that's fascinating. So you started writing Sam in New York after you'd done the Finding Sam book, and this is still during the pandemic.
Absolutely.
How is the pandemic still influencing you, do you think, in Sam and New York?
I think in general, the pandemic's still affecting me in every aspect of my life.
Mm-hmm.
What it has done still is basically kind of minimalize my life. So before, I always used to go out and, go to museums, hang out with people and stuff. But now I can't really do that, especially since, there's capacity limits and, some places are being shut down. And it's just not the same. Like the atmosphere is not the same. So I don't feel as much of a pull to go outside as much as I used to. So that leaves me more time to work on my series and think about when I want to achieve certain milestones for them and what I'm willing to do to achieve those goals.
Right. So you're much more focused.
Yes, because I don't have any more excuses like I used to.
And you've got people keeping you accountable by the sounds of it. So during the pandemic, you've launched your Nuts and Bolts podcast. You've got Sam in New York. You've also launched Fortuna's Games, which is a gaming platform. You have been very busy.
Yes, I have. So Maria asked a question in the chat box. She says, which program are you using on the phone for this amazing drawing? And congrats. Well, thank you. So which program am I using? I'm using something called Ibis Paint, which is a mobile-only program, and it's available on the Google App Store as well as the Apple App Store.
Oh, right. So Ibis, IBIS.
Yes, I can type it here.
Yeah,
Ibis
if you can type it, because I think
X. Yeah,
there you are. Ibis Paint. Perfect. Thank you. Because I think everyone's going to be wanting to have a go at that now. And then Sandra is also asking, I would like to know Imelda's favorite artist, which may have influenced her drawings.
Great question, Sandra. So I think one of my favorite artists would definitely be Inyo Asano, who is a Japanese mangaka or comic creator, and he's known for the slice of life and psychological comic Oyasumi Punpun, or Goodnight Punpun in English. And it's basically a very intimate tale, but it's also a lot darker than my stories, about a young man from an abusive family struggling to grow up.
Can you type the name of that in the sidebar as well? Because I think we're all going to struggle with that one. Yes. And people will want to look back at that, I think, and see what you're talking about for sure. So, so you've been incredibly productive during the pandemic. We'll definitely have a look up at those. What does the future look like for you? And financially, how are you coping?
The future, I think, as we can all say during this difficult time, it's very uncertain at this point. And financially, I'm doing all right. I'm not making much money from Tapas or anything creative. I'm mostly a freelance writer now. So everything I do is remote, which kind of reinforces the idea that the pandemic is still affecting me, and I can stay more focused on my creative stuff as well because I'm always basically at home. But basically I'm a freelance writer now, and I'm more confident in my writing than ever before. So yes, in my day job, what I do is basically do a lot of marketing copies, as well as writing for websites, ghost writing for different companies, especially tech, because I am sort of a techie, but not really a technical one. I just like reading about technology.
You're much techier than us, I can tell you.
I don't know any coding though. So for any computer programmers, I am not an engineer or a computer programmer.
But we all, as you say, it's about finding the thing that gives you joy. Does writing give you joy? Is that something that gives you joy?
It definitely does. And I think I realized that, unlike Tete, who is just amazing at writing, just as a shout out, this month she has already written, I think, 13,000 words into her novel. And at this point, her manuscript's already 200 pages, which is 200 pages printed out as a book, which is amazing. And, I could never do that. Like, I tried writing creatively and it never amounted more to like 60 pages. But technical writing, I am better at technical writing because I think it allows me to organize my thoughts better. And that ties into this whole idea of discipline and having goals, because when I'm actually setting out schedules for myself where I wake up pretty early in the morning. I do one marketing essay or copy for the company, and then I go back to my creative work. I draw a picture for a future page in the comic, and then I have lunch, and then I take a break, and then I go out for a walk, and then I write another copy, and then I draw again, and then I have dinner, and then I write something, and then I chill out with friends and talk to people on Discord and other platforms at night. So I get a lot of things done that way, and I think that's very satisfying.
Yeah, you're managing your time incredibly well. So from someone who, obviously had a bit of a mental health crisis in there at that end of the legal time, you've definitely resourced yourself back to where you were in being determined and focused. And the pandemic has been a very difficult time for everybody, but it seems to be that it's been quite motivational for you to get yourself back into a very disciplined way of living so that you find the joy in your life as well.
Yes, exactly. I found my joy and my purpose in creating, and also, I actually just getting a lot of things done every day. I think that's actually, for me at least, the best medicine against feeling depressed or hopeless, because before, when I didn't have any goals, creative or career-wise, other than randomly looking for jobs on Indeed and LinkedIn, it was very depressing.
So having this focus in these goals and actually going out and finding things for yourself and reconnecting with that passion that you had for drawing and writing and connecting with people who have inspired you, sounds like that's been the game changer for you. Pardon the pun. So Sandra's asking, do you sometimes illustrate other writers' creations?
That's a great question, Sandra. Thank you for your awesome questions in general. Yes, I have. Actually, I've done some fan art and, gift art for R.N. Ravelet as well as Tete. I have drawn a lot of crossover comics as well. So they're also posted on Tapas, where my characters like Sam and Joel interact with their characters. And we've also had audio role plays with me and Tete, kind of like an audio book, basically, but we improvise it on the spot and we record it and then we put it on our podcast.
So the podcast, the Nuts and Bolts podcast, which is at the bottom of the screen here, that's something that you do with Tete and with R.M. Ravelet.
Yes.
Yeah. So it's a kind of, it's a collaboration between the three of you. So if people are interested in that, do click on the green button at the bottom here and it'll take you through to the podcast and you can see what the guys do over there. Now I'm really intrigued by this question. This is a good one from Louisa. She's saying, how did you find Pure? So how did you happen upon Pure Arts Group?
Right. So I was thinking of, trying to get to know more artists and also trying to expose my work out there more. So I was on a lot of websites like Artenda, Open Calls for Artists, I can't remember them, transartist.org, and a bunch of all of these others, kind of like job board sites for artists, you can call them. And I found you guys through that, I think. One of them, I can't remember which one.
Yeah, we're out there. we do a lot. I mean, we've got a lot of members, so all over the world. So yeah, I'm really thrilled that you found us because you bring quite a different perspective to it. We've got quite a few younger members now in the community, and we love the collaboration and the sharing of ideas. And what you're saying is so inspiring, and it shows that it doesn't matter what age or where you are in the world. We're all still going through the same things. We need other people to inspire us. We need to focus on what it is that makes us happy and gives us joy. Absolutely. We need to find our own way, our own methodology into our joy. And you found yours through getting busy and being focused and being disciplined in your day. For me, that actually is exactly the same way. It doesn't work for everybody, but for me, definitely that resonates with me. I need to be very structured and busy. So we're coming up to 8:20. So, and it's been fascinating. Thank you. You've been so generous and honest, Imelda, with your journey and the people who have supported you and inspired you. It's really inspiring, I have to say. What's the future? What do you want to do going forward?
What do I want to do?
So what is it that you want to, what new media do you want to try? Where do you see yourself going now?
I think what I will be doing is probably publish more hard copy books. Like for now, for example, this I published last month, and it's a hard copy of the first 3 chapters of Joel's story, the Book of Joel. And it's also, most of it is on Tapas, but the last chapter, most of it isn't on Tapas yet because it hasn't been scheduled to that point. But this is all the buffer, all the way up to February 2022. So, I'm going to be printing out the hard copy of Sam in New York, which the first volume, which I finished a few days ago. So I have everything up from the prologue to chapter 4 now, and I want to print a hard copy of it just like this. And for now, this will just be for me and a select few friends. But in the future, once my work gets out there and find the budget to do it, I'm probably going to print out more copies for sale.
You could do print on demand, couldn't you?
That's true, but shipping can be very expensive.
Yeah. Have you thought about putting it up as a digital book? You know how we do the digital magazines. You could put it up as a digital book that then people then order. And once you've got a number, so like a crowdfunder kind of concept where you put up the digital book and then people order their hard copy. And once you've got you hit a certain number, then you go to a print run.
That's a good idea. Yeah. I did have an ebook version for some of the stuff I did before, like Finding Sam, but it didn't really get a lot of traction other than, people who already know me. I think the challenge is getting people who don't know me to want to purchase it.
Yeah. So I think going down the crowdfunder route is a good way because you get support in the marketing of that. You still need a good community, but you've got a few communities going on here with your friends, and now you're part of Pure as well. This is a very big community as well, and we all support each other and we like to promote each other. So I would say have a little look at that as a concept of giving people something to look at, but then letting them kind of like say, yeah, we'd like to have a copy when you print it. And then at least you're confident that you're not going to be out of pocket when you actually go to print run and post. That's something that, we've done is like sell it in advance, basically.
Yeah, that's a really great idea. I will definitely consider it. I did think about doing a crowdfunding for another sub project of mine, which is the Fortunate Games Tarot deck. And as people on Instagram know, I'm actually almost finished the Major Arcana. And what this is basically just all of the cards of the tarot deck, but with my characters. And also, on my Patreon, an in-depth explanation of why I chose certain characters for certain cards.
Yeah. So did you mention Patreon then?
Yeah, Patreon.
Yeah, so you have a Patreon page as well that people can support you via the Patreon page. You need to put that up in the sidebar so people can go on and see your Patreon and see how they can connect with you and how they can support you. So Patreon is something that we are very familiar with. And we have another artist, Graham Cullis, who uses Patreon really extensively to get support for his artistic practice. And lots of people sign up and become members of that. And that's how he manages to do quite a lot of his work as well, through the Patreon portal. So that's another route that you could go to with your book, is do it through Patreon. I think you and I, what is Patreon? Sandra's asking. So Patreon, as you can see in the sidebar, Sandra, excuse me, it's spelled Patreon, and it's a platform that it's basically people can become your patrons. They can pledge money to support your practice, and in return, a bit like a crowdfunder, you give them something in return. So I think, Imelda, it'd be good for you and I to have a chat after this, and I'm sure we can give you some more support and help in your journey, and we'd love to. You're fascinating, and I think your drawings are incredible, and what you're doing is really inspiring, and your story is so inspiring as well, that you found your route through this world. And we all have to do that. We all have to navigate and get into alignment with ourselves, and then it just gets a little bit easier all the time when we find our tribe and we find our people, like you have with R.M. Rovelet and with Tete de Punk, and hopefully with us as well. You'll get what you need to keep going, and good luck with as the chapters come out on Tapas. And I've been watching your on your Instagram, you gradually doing the tarot cards as well, which is also fascinating as well. So well done, and you should be very proud of yourself. Very proud of yourself.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I have come a long way. I was, just talking to a couple of friends last night about how, the pandemic has really shaped me and, helped me to grow up in many ways. Because when I think back about how I used to be before the pandemic, I just think about how immature and unfocused I was. And now I'm just, more independent and more focused, and I have a real goal to work towards.
Yeah, we've all been in the bit about being unfocused and immature, and we all find our moment. Well, most of us find our moment. That's life, isn't it? That is life. We all have to go through these phases of learning and desensitizing and trying stuff out. So it's been absolutely fascinating. Thank you so much. I will. We'll be in contact over email afterwards. But thank you so much for sharing everything. And thank you for RM Roverley for joining us and also commenting. And I don't know whether your friend Tete has been here as well, maybe over on Facebook. Anyone who's been watching us on Facebook Live, we will move across the links that we've been talking about in the side column over onto the Facebook Live. There you are. There's your friend commenting on the side. You absolutely brilliant at sharing.
Thank you so much.
It's been amazing for you to share, because that's a big thing, us sharing our story, especially when, it is very heartfelt. So we've got Florence from America as well. Hi, Flo. Always good to see people from all over the world listening to these. They're not podcasts, they're broadcasts, because it just shows that we have there's a commonality in everything that we do, and that we all need to support each other and work together. Thank you so much. Thank you. And this broadcast will be up on YouTube for everyone to watch back in the next few days. We can feel you and the journey. We so can. Absolutely. That's absolutely. We can feel you in the journey. And we've got you, Imelda. We're here.
Thank you so much again.
Go on to always ask the questions, go into our Facebook forums and everything. And, you've got a community there that now understand you and will share the collective brain with you.
All right.
And thank you for sharing everything with us all the way from Toronto.
Right. Thank you so much again.
Yeah. Okay. You take care, and we'll see you all. So let me have a look who's next. We're going on to live next week. The first live next week will be Julia Desch on Tuesday. And then we've got Louisa Crispin on Wednesday. So yeah, more lives next week. But thank you for now, Imelda, and I will be in touch.
All right. Thank you so much again. Bye.
Yeah, take care. Bye.
Bye.